Awesome. We are here. We are at time. Hi, all. I am Darren Murph. I'm the head of remote at GitLab. I'm the lead author of GitLab's Remote Playbook. And it is my pleasure and honor to introduce Jennifer Christie, the Chief HR Officer at Twitter, and a wonderful, brilliant human being to boot. Jennifer, thank you so much for making time for this. I'm so excited for the conversation.
Me too, Darren. Thanks for having me.
So Twitter was marching towards a more flexible future well before COVID-19. In fact, here's a bit of trivia. There is a tweet from Twitter CEO, Jack, embedded in the GitLab handbook from October of 2019, where he indicated that indeed Twitter's future would be remote. So Twitter was actually ahead of the COVID-19 curve in moving in this direction. And in May 2020, you published a post on Twitter's blog that I credit as the catalyst for much of the global transition to remote that we have seen since. So talk a little bit about what Twitter's strategy was in terms of a flexible future and how you looked at the workplace for maybe the past year or two, and if COVID accelerated that or catalyzed that in any way.
Yeah, sure. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me again. Yeah, if we zoom out a little bit and go back to 2018, we were just embarking on a new both workplace and workforce strategy, and we called it Global Blueprint. And obviously, we were not preparing for a global pandemic. None of us knew that was around the corner. But there were some things that were driving us towards this new strategy, and I'll outline a few of those. One is, you may not know this, but over 80% of the people on our service are actually outside the United States. And our purpose is to serve the public conversation. And we took a step back and said, we really want to make sure that our company reflects our service. And right now, the predominance, of our workforce is in the US. And particularly, most of the people who are building our service are in the US. And we said, does that make sense? Could we build a better service and a better product if we decentralized our workforce? And we really had people who were building our product, understanding the local culture and context of the conversations that were taking place around the world. So that was one aspect of it. Another aspect of it was, as you know, competition for talent is fierce in tech. And we found ourselves in a situation where we were really just focused on kind of San Francisco and the Bay Area for tech. And we knew that there was a growing number and different talent pools out there outside of that area that were rich with tech talent. But we weren't tapping into them because we were really only targeting people who either were in the Bay Area or wanted to relocate to the Bay Area, which limits the pool. And then finally, we had our own tweeps coming to us. We call our people tweeps. We had our own tweeps coming to us saying that they wanted more flexibility. They didn't want to leave Twitter, but they wanted to live somewhere else. Or they didn't want to leave Twitter, but they wanted to work remotely, and were we okay with that? And so all of these things kind of came together a couple of years ago, and we took a step back and said, we need to have a different strategy. We're not prepared for the future. We are not inclusive of remote workers. In fact, we only had less than 3% of our employees globally who were working full-time remote. And we said, this is the future. Companies like yours, Darren, were starting full-time remote, and more and more companies were coming online like that. And so we just said, we've got to start preparing our company for the future, and we've got to start positioning our organization from a talent and workforce perspective and location perspective to make the best product and serve the public conversation the best we could. So that's kind of the road we were on, which really did include remote working as a core feature of that. So as we headed into COVID, we definitely and I can talk about, if you want to, some of the things we did to prepare, but
sure,
we were marching along that path. And so when COVID hit, it just accelerated us down a path we were on.
So many great nuggets in there. One thing I want to key in on is what I hear in your explanation is that even before COVID, remote work was not seen as a challenge that you had to overcome, but it needed to be a core part of your operational strategy, of your talent acquisition and your talent retention strategy. And I think conceptually, a lot of leaders can understand that. It's just difficult to see in the moment because many of them have been thrust into this remote world without a lot of planning and preparation to truly formulate a strategy around it. So a lot of this is leaders like you and GitLab being the pioneer, being the beacon for what a remote company can look like if you actually put a lot of intentionality around that. And we'll touch on that. But speaking of challenges, I do want to ask what the biggest challenge has been, or challenges that you've seen, whether that's feedback from surveys, whether that's something that's still ongoing, whether that's still up in the air. To your point, it was a strategy. You were moving in that direction. But like all of us, COVID has forced us to move maybe a bit faster than we had planned for.
Right. Yeah. So a number of challenges. One was just that while we had been laying the foundations and starting to build that capability to work remotely and be more inclusive of remote workers, we certainly hadn't contemplated sending everyone home all at once.
Yeah.
And so we rapidly had to start changing in how we worked, not just where we were working, but how we worked, and working more asynchronously. What we found when we first made this shift is that a lot of people were trying to recreate an office environment in a remote situation. Yeah. So everything was live and in person, which was everything was on a video. So right. Whether it was social interaction, whether it was more informal updating, or whether it was actual meetings, everything was online. And people were just really burning out because they weren't adjusting how they worked to this new normal. So that was definitely something we leaned in on. What we've talked a lot about and is around the difficulty that parents have had in this environment, because as you and I have discussed, it's not a normal environment. It's not a normal remote working environment, right? Children are learning at home while parents are trying to get their work done at home too. So we really had to lean in and provide that support and flexibility to parents. That was another big thing. And then I would say just making sure the mental health and wellness of our employees stayed strong, because it's not just about remote working. We're in the midst of a global pandemic, global economic crisis, and everyone had lots of different things to deal with, and everyone's story and everyone's situation has been different, but challenging all. And so it's been one of the things that we've really been focused on to make sure that everyone has what they need to be well during this period of time.
So important. And I think it keys in on another important element of this, and that's the difference between allowing something and supporting something. Mm-hmm. For a lot of companies, they may have felt forced by all of these external stressors to allow remote work, maybe begrudgingly, maybe they're not really into it, but they feel like they kind of have to. There's peer pressure in the industry. There's a big difference between allowing remote work and supporting remote work, and thinking through all of the elements that go into each individual potentially being in a different seat every day, and what do perks, benefits, and policies look like when you're trying to ensure that everyone feels like they belong and they're included. So I'm curious, when offices start opening back up, what does that look like for Twitter? What does it look like on the other side? What does belonging and support look like for companies that are trying to figure out, how do we define remote work support?
Mm-hmm. It's a great question. It's something obviously a lot of people are obsessing about. But first, I'll hit your point around allowing it and supporting it.
Yeah. I
think because this has been so global, it's hit every industry, it's hit every country. You've seen companies that never would have talked about allowing remote work open up to it because they had to. It was just forced on them. And this isn't something that has just taken place for a week or two, or even a month or two, right? This is enduring, and it's enduring long enough for people to change behaviors and expectations. And people are starting to work in different ways. People are starting to adapt. And I will say that coming out of this, companies that think that this is still an allow type of thing, I think are going to be missing the boat on a lot of talent. Because I think it's going to be something that's an expectation that it's allowed. And it really comes more to the experience that you provide that's going to be the differentiator in terms of what companies are doing it well. And that goes back to the meat of your question, how are we thinking about that going back in? We've done a lot of surveys with our employees, and we definitely have seen a huge shift in mindsets and preferences, even from April, which is about a month into our fully remote work, to July, and we're just launching a new survey now. And you've seen this steady shift. Managers are more comfortable with having distributed teams and having their employees, be in different locations. And our tweets are starting to really think like, hey, this is something I want to do long term, even past COVID. This is the flexibility that I want. So we've seen the number of people indicate that they want to be full-time remote go up in three, 4 times what it was before. The largest number of preference right now, the largest percentage of our employees though prefer a hybrid. Yeah. As we come back in, which is they want to split their time like 3 days a week at home, a couple times in the office. And I think it'll continue to shift, but I think it'll stabilize at some point. And that's probably still going to be our biggest bucket, if you will, people who are going to be splitting their time, which is frankly trickier than now in some ways, because it's going to be, right now we've got this complete level playing field, shared experience. And so what we're thinking about now is how do we make sure that we keep this level playing field, like keep the best of what is been going on over the course of this year. Like, what do we really like about this shared experience that we have and the flexibility that we all have? And what do we miss about the in-person interactions? And how can we architect those going back in to make sure that we still have some of those in-person interactions at the right milestones at the right time? And then we are making sure that people feel like they really have a choice. It's not the haves and the have-nots. We have a true level playing field. And so we're just thinking about what we disincentivize about why people go into an office. Yeah. You don't have to go to an office to make sure you get exposure to leaders. You don't have to be in an office to have the career progression. You don't have to be in a specific office for what you want to do with your career, what projects you work on. And so we really want to create that level playing field so people aren't making choices about where they work because of that. They're making choices about where they work because where are they most productive? Where do they want to be? What communities do they want to live in? That's the optionality we want to provide. And where they work is just a matter of choosing their productivity and having those options.
I want to get that entire last blurb tattooed around the world and show it on the rooftop. We have actually talked about this, that it requires a mental shift, that the office cannot be the epicenter of decision making. It cannot have any gravitational pull towards praise or promotion. If you start making your decisions based on that, you end up with a fractured workforce that will compromise some of the perks of remote for some of the assumed benefits of a need to be in the office. And I do hope most companies will listen to this, because it's something you have to be intentional about, especially if you've been a co-located company. People have been conditioned that face time matters, office time matters, and they actually have a history to prove that that is indeed the case. We are in a sea change, and companies will have to make deliberate choices, to your point, to disincentivize that. I like to say that a workspace at an office has to be on equal footing as an airplane seat or a hotel conference room or a WeWork or a spare bedroom or a closet. It's just another seat. It's just another place to go work remotely. I've heard you mention a few times the 5th industrial revolution. So talk more about that and what it means for Twitter and more broadly, the future of work.
Sure. Before COVID, we'd heard a lot of people talk about the 4th industrial revolution, right? Yeah. Thinking about AI and robotics and nanotechnology and smart tech, just really transforming how we worked and transforming industries. And I don't discount that. I think that those things have really radically changed and will continue to radically change industries and how we work. But this whole experiment and what I just mentioned before about it being so broad, all industries, all geographies have experienced this together. So coming out of it, not only is there going to be much more of a demand for the flexibility and the option to work remotely across industry, across places, I think it has had some other effects. So around where people are working, you've seen people leaving cities in some situations for more space, to feel safer. And I think, we'll see some of those changes continue to shift. And I do think that'll have an impact on this kind of headquarters mentality and companies that kind of insist when you join our company, you have to be in this particular location. So I think it's related, but not exactly the same as kind of this uprise in remote work. And the other piece I think that is a real opportunity for everyone is that people rely less on travel to make connections. Yeah. I know at Twitter, we had a lot of our teams that were road warriors. If they had a global team, they were on the road all the time, because those real connections were when they were in that particular office in that location and they just did the rounds.
Yeah.
They're finding now that there are different ways of working. They can make those connections if they're a little more flexible about time zones. They can make those connections and work effectively if they lean into asynchronous work and learn how to work differently. And so we don't want to lose what that unlocks for us around global teams and being able to really work effectively. And that's not to say you won't still travel, but maybe you don't have to do it every quarter. Maybe it's more strategic travel, and maybe it's a way to find a little more balance. So I just think, obviously, increase in demand and expectations about remote work and the experience you have working remotely it has already radically changed and will continue to do so, as well as just where people are working and how they work and engage in global teams. I think it's in many ways the silver lining, because I think it's going to be transformative.
Completely agree. I think the second and third order effects of this transition will far outweigh any of the negatives in the tough period that we're in right now. And I also want to double click on an element you shared there about travel. I joined the Skift Global Forum a few weeks ago, which is a travel conference. What does that have to do with remote work? But the question is, what will business travel look like, and will we ever travel again? I've had a lot of people leaders reach out to me and ask, how do you onboard people when no one in our company will ever see anyone in person again? And I'm thinking, oh no, that's not the solve. We will see each other again, but it gives you an opportunity to strategically deploy travel as a way to build culture and to create interesting collaborative environments that you may not have embraced before, or maybe people were too burned out on the road warrior lifestyle to actually embrace that. So I see it as an opportunity, having smaller sub teams being able to poll themselves and pick a point on the map that they do a little bit of team bonding, a little bit of strategy building. That's something that probably wouldn't have been in the budget in past years, but if you're unwinding a bit of office space and everyone is predominantly working remotely, perhaps it's more feasible. So I want to switch gears a bit. I'm going to say a phrase, and then I just want you to respond to it, whatever comes to mind. So the phrase is, crisis-induced work from home is not actually remote work.
Yes, crisis-induced remote work is not actually remote work. And I think that's a really important point, and something that terrifies me, actually, just for the people who are only experiencing remote work during this period of time. Especially with some of the, as we, before COVID, right before COVID, we'd been at two years at our global blueprint strategy. We still had managers that, like I said, were resistant. We still had tweeps who were resistant, and they were kind of forced into this. Mm-hmm. And I started hearing some rumblings like, see, I knew this wasn't what I wanted, right? Because it's, it's not. So we've done a lot of work to explain, listen, in a real kind of environment post-COVID, you will have outlets that you don't have right now to go see friends and some other things that would have given you some relief from sitting at your desk or being at home. And the school situation for parents is something that is obviously unique and not kind of a normal remote work situation. So I do hope that people give it a chance. We have seen the initial resistance to it and the initial, like, this is really hard, start to open up as people start to get better at it. And that was also a little bit of the thing that people who hadn't leaned into the resources and things that we were trying to push before, who just have had to do it, have started to open up over time, which is, I think, why we've seen those preferences start to move. People are like, hey, I can actually do this, and there are some benefits to it. And maybe when we get to the other side of COVID, it'll be really cool. So I'm hoping that they hang in there.
I do agree with that. When you put someone in a situation that they think they can just trudge through, you may sort of ignore actually embracing what it takes to get through it. And not just get through it, but to thrive in it. And I like to tell people that I've worked from home for the past 7 months, but I actually haven't worked remotely at all for the past 7 months. I can't just easily get on a plane and go travel somewhere. Although the local coffee shops have different capacity restrictions now, it's less easy to just go grab dinner with a friend after work. Everything just feels a bit different. And you're right, for those that this is their baseline for remote work, this is their first experience with long-term remote work, please don't conflate that with actual remote work. There's a reason that the remoters who have been championing this for years have done so. The bottom line is, when you're in forced quarantine, you basically get none of the benefits of remote work except for losing the commute. The commute is great, don't get me wrong, but there's a lot of other stuff on the other side of it. And I he prays on Twitter for living this out in public and helping to build a roadmap for other companies that are scrambling and looking for ways to not just survive this, but to thrive to it.
Yeah.
Speaking of that, I'm just
can I add one thing to that?
You can, yeah, go for it.
One of the things that we're also to kind of push that mindset that you've been talking about in this, in terms of like embracing remote work and thinking about what it really could open up. Yeah. We're actually looking at how we change the language of how we talk about this. Okay. Remote implies that you're far away from something else. And, we're trying to debunk this kind of headquarters mentality, and that everyone has to kind of be tethered to something other than their home in order to be successful or whatever it is. And, so we're exploring that now, how we can talk about this in a way that does create that level playing field, that it's not you're in the right space or you're remote away from it. So just anyways, and you and I can take this offline and continue all the conversations we've had, but I would love for us to be able to figure that out.
It's such an important point, especially for companies that will retain some amount of real estate going forward, because remote has this implication that you are remote to something else, and that may create a two-tier system, even if it's just psychological, that
exactly.
You're remote from something else. And to your point, when it's all remote, when everyone is forced to be remote, you by default have a level playing field. But the terminology becomes increasingly important when you do have other collaboration centers or other offices. You have to make sure that even the terminology you use reinforces that these are equal places. If you choose to go into the office on a Tuesday, that's fine, but it's not going to get you any closer to praise or promotion or results than it would if you were in your home. Very important point. I do think that there's the industry as a whole could stand to rally around that and make sure the words that we're saying, I mean, we've put a lot of effort into using inclusive terms and pronouns and how we reference people. I think that we should probably look similarly at how we describe remote and where people work. Mm-hmm. It's very personal for people, and it matters now more than ever.
Exactly.
So look, a lot of people have talked about remote in the framework of productivity. Some of the early questions were, will productivity go up or down if we just thrust everyone out into their homes? And shockingly, a lot of reports said productivity was up. And now recent reports have said productivity may be waning a bit, because after 6 months of ongoing pandemic, where you're still probably hunched over a kitchen counter, shocker, maybe it's not the best place to work, but I digress. But what's the potential here for the impact across diversity, inclusion, and dispersed geographic opportunity going forward? This goes well beyond productivity. I mean, you and I have talked about this. The heart of remote is flexibility, inclusivity, dispersed opportunity. Where do you see that going at Twitter and the industry at large?
Yeah, so if you go back, it was actually not that we don't want to be productive at Twitter, but our biggest driver for our global blueprint strategy was around talent and being able to tap into broader talent pools. And a lot of that focused on diversity, because we were very targeted at very limited talent pools from a geographic standpoint. And we knew there was a lot more talent out there that we weren't accessing. And so part of our strategy is, yes, being able to fill roles faster because we have more talent pools to choose from, but being able to build a more diverse and global workforce by opening up where people could work. And so that was very much core to our strategy, still is. And we're finding that it creates a much more inclusive environment. Our companies become more inclusive as we brought people in and let them live where they want to live. Where we find them is where they can stay. Now, if they want to come to San Francisco or some other office, that's fine too.
Sure.
But if that's where they want to be, that's where their community is, that's where their family is, and that's where they want to live, they can live there and also work where they want to work, which is hopefully Twitter. And it's really expanded that, and by bringing people in that aren't just in like one location or one bubble, it's different thought, different ideas that are coming to us, and representing truly different cultures around the globe. Part of our decentralization strategy was truly decentralizing leadership. Because as you know, you can say all you want to about, oh, you don't have to come to headquarters for X, Y, or Z. But if that's where all the leaders are, and that's where all the meetings and decisions are taking place, that's where people will gravitate. And we did some studies when we first launched this about travel to San Francisco, and it was amazing. You could see it, like we talk about Twitter being a flock. people were flocking to San Francisco. And the reasoning was about like, I've got to do my tour around, make sure people see me. Yeah. And we didn't want that. So, I'm now in Washington, D.C. I'm living the decentralization dream myself. We're trying to make sure that leaders are going in different places. And it also has the added benefit of expanding career opportunities for people, because people aren't just limited to higher up level roles if they want to move to certain locations.
Such an important point. We have an entire handbook page on forcing functions that help make remote first a reality. And one of the biggest forcing functions is to disperse your executive team. If the offices reopen and your executives are the first ones to flock back into it, you are thwarting all of this infrastructure that you're building. Your communication workflows are going to go largely back to synchronous and in one room. Decisions are going to tend to be made in a vacuum. You're going to be less thoughtful and mindful about time zones because all of your leadership happens to be in one time zone. So kind of tongue in cheek here, but look, if you've got a few executives on your team that have been dreaming of living in Zanzibar or Lake Como or anywhere in the world, let them embrace that. We can probably stand to spread our executive teams further if that is the model that we want our the rest of our team and the rest of our company to look like. Exactly. So I've got one more question I want to tee up for you, but first I want to cede the floor to you. Anything you want to add or tell people to check out or how to follow Twitter's journey?
Yeah, I blog about it occasionally, and more and more we're doing that, and we're also looking at creating kind of an open source playbook of kind of things that we've learned, and the way we're going around our location strategy and some of how we level the playing field going forward, because we do think it's something that we can all learn together on. I've certainly learned a lot from you and from all the work that you've done.
Much appreciated. I found that the remote community is a loving one and one that loves to share information. So let's keep sharing. We're making this a brighter future together. So last question for the day, and thank you very much for doing this. What's the first place that you plan on traveling to or working from? What's on the other side of this? And we're back to a traveling future.
Yeah, so my answer is going to sound like everything I just said is out the door, but it's not. Let me explain. So it probably would be San Francisco, and I'll explain why. We decided to move back to DC, or to move to DC as part of this, or for our own personal reasons, but I felt I could do that because of the flexibility that Twitter offers and what we just talked about dispersing leadership. But that train had started moving towards the end of last year. And so we had already started making the move here. We were right in the middle of it when COVID really landed on us, and we made the decision to send everybody home and close our offices. Right. And so I never got closure for being in San Francisco. I was there almost 3 years. I literally was midway, but the last time I walked out of that office, I didn't know it was going to be the last time I walked out of that office for about a year. Yeah. And when I moved out, all the restaurants were closed. Everything was shut down. So I need closure, I guess. So I think I'd like to get back to San Francisco and walk into the office, get some stuff off my desk, and hit a couple of restaurants and close down my time in San Francisco.
Well, look, let me know when you head out there, because I'm missing the city as well. My wife and I adopted a newborn, and the birth mother was from there. Our hearts are very close to the city. So you know what? Let's just go out there together. And
sounds great.
Right. Thank you very much for the time. Thanks all for tuning in today. Have an awesome rest of the event.
Thanks, Darren. Thanks, everybody.